Welcome to Ecologic for the month of November. Beautiful time of the year. Nice and cool in the morning and low 70s, high 60s during the day. Beautiful, beautiful weather. Great to be in South Louisiana. The leaves are starting to drop. I don't think they're changing color too much. But we're here to talk about the flood of '16 in the Teche Vermillion watershed. A lot of folks, volunteers, uh, looked real hard at what happened and where the water went. Where it didn't go during this event, Dave Dixon is one of them, where we actually went immediately after the flood up to Catawba and up the headwaters of the Vermillion and the Teche, and actually measured the channel capacity, the bottom depth, the approximate level above sea level on the Bayou Teche and Catawba, and then looked at the Ruth Canal and looked at some of the things that happened at the Keystone Locks and didn't happen. You know, that catastrophic flood, according to FEMA, in the Teche Vermillion watershed, which covers about 8 parishes, there were 3,900 homes that they paid $357 million to restore. Now, they are aware that this is not all the homes and structures and buildings and so forth that were impacted by the flood. And a lot of farm property was impacted, hayland and soybean crops and rice fields and second crop rice and so forth were damaged or destroyed by this event. Lots of trees destroyed, magnolia especially, that stayed underwater almost a month. And an astonishing part of this information, FEMA paid out damages to 3,900 homes, probably another 1,000 homes, buildings, and so forth that were not paid for, had insurance, or for one reason or another, no claims were made. But they make an astonishing statement at a public meeting a few months ago that 40% of the homes that were impacted by the flood had less than a foot of water. And that's a real important aspect of this flood. If we could manage the water a little better and lower stages 2 or 3 feet, we would have an enormous impact on how many homes and areas were flooded. And when you look at the watershed, it goes from Alexandria all the way down to the Gulf. With the water from Bayou Catawba, Washington, Louisiana, all the way north, there's 10 or 12 bayous that drain in Catawba. And historically, Bayou Catawba drained right into the Schoeffler Basin and the Schoeffler River. When they put the levee system to protect us from the river floods in 1935, they didn't really deal with local flooding. They thought, well, that'll take care of itself. There was an attempt to take the Bayou Catawba water and bring it into Lake Dotrey, Lake Foss Point, along the levee Barpit Canal. That was changed in 1985 when the Teche Vermillion project was built, and to make Teche Vermillion work, they couldn't allow Bayou Catawba water to go down the Barpit Canal to Lake Foss Point, because the project had to get water upstream about 14 miles into Bayou Teche, so it flowed down Teche and down to Vermillion to us. And that was a major change in the watershed. Now, Bayou Catawba has many, many rivers flow into it. Bayou Catawba is very large. It's about 25 feet deep, almost 200 feet wide. The channel capacity is 3,000 to 5,000 square feet, as we've measured it. When you look at the water flowing into it, Bayou Buff and Bayou Cocodra come together above Washington about 7, 8 miles to form Bayou Catawba. Bayou Catawba is only 19 miles long. It gets very large very quickly. And then Bayou Coron, which drains Lake Chico and all the area around Ville Platte through Lake Chico, is the original Bayou Teche. The Bayou Teche never did come into Catawba. From Leonville northeast, a canal was dredged that we call Bayou Teche. That was done before the Civil War, and we have maps that verify that. So altering the watershed has been happening for many, many decades and years. Then we have coming down after Bayou Grand, where Little Bayou Waukesha and Bayou Waukesha both drain the Thistlewade Swamp and Wildlife Management Area and goes way north of Highway 10. Then after that you have Bayou D'Arbonne, the Bar Pit Canal, which has Bayou Rouge, Bayou de Glace, Yellow Bayou, all drains into it. So all these waterways drain into Catawba and now have to drain through Little Bayou, the Bayou Teche and Port Barry. As we measured it, it's got a 100-foot channel about 8 feet deep. That measure was made when the water level was 17.6 on Catawba at the gates. So there's no way Bayou Teche can handle all that water. Then it comes into Bayou Teche, and Bayou Teche has a dam on it below St. Martinsville. So if the water would follow the Bayou Teche to get to the bay is about 110 miles. It turns off. The only outlet to Bayou Teche naturally is Bayou Vermillion, where it starts at Horneville. It's very small. It's about 60 feet wide and 5 feet deep. 300-foot channel capacity roughly. But Bayou Vermillion has no restrictions. And so it's a 70-mile trip to the bay. So the water careens down Vermillion and gets awful high and causes problems all the way down. And so Catawba is a major problem the Corps should have dealt with. It started in 1935. Just dealing with Catawba would impact stages on the Vermillion. How much, we don't know. That has to be computer modeled. And then the next big problem for the system is Cypress Island Swamp. Bayou Vermillion drains into Cypress Island Swamp. The Ruth Canal off the Bayou Teche drains into it. Bayou Tartu from Cade and Broussard and Youngsville, all that area drains into the Cypress Island Swamp, as well as the Vermillion. The Vermillion careens north, goes backwards, and feels that the only way it can leave is through Bayou Vermillion down through Lafayette. That brings us to the third major problem. Bayou Vermillion has very shallow spots in it, right near Coulee Mean and Rotary Point Landing. It's only about 2 feet deep at normal water level. A little 15 horsepower outboard going slow will stir up the bottom. So those are the things that we have to deal with. Now, things are being done to deal with Cypress Island, causes problems for Lafayette, Vermillion, St. Martin, and Iberia. And during the flood of 2016, Cypress Island got so high that it overwhelmed the dam system at Keystone, and the ridge on the OUL farm was topped by 4 feet, flooding Spanish Lake, which overtopped the levees protecting western Iberia Parish, community of Iberia Parish, flooding hundreds of homes around Squirrel Run and the Gulf Course area, western Iberia. And so those problems can be resolved. A computer model in '93 performed by the Corps, and there was a contract with the, I think at the time was John Chance. They surveyed the river, did an engineering study of it, this computer model, and to deal with Cypress Island, draining it into the Bayou Teche below Keystone, where it's much below Keystone Dam, with lower stages on the Vermillion 6 to 8 feet. We're trying to get a hold of that study just to see, you know, to get the actual study and look at what the engineers came up with and actually doing a computer model and doing bottom measurements and what the recommendations were. And I don't think anything was ever done with it. There was strong opposition at the time from St. Martin Parish for whatever reason. The sheriff of St. Martin Parish was strongly opposed to any changes to the Keystone Dam. And this model, this plan, called for a gate in the Keystone Dam. It would take it out, but it would allow for floodwater to pass it. So that's kind of the history of why we flooded. And it's kind of interesting that during this big flood, Iberia Parish got a lot more rain, but downtown New Iberia did not flood. It didn't even reach flood stage. It got to about right at 6 feet, flood stage is 9 feet. Lafayette was 8 feet above flood stage for 30 days. And the area around Orneville in Lafayette Parish stayed flooded. The area around the Carmel Avenue where it crosses the bayou there, at Long Bridge, I think they call it, that stayed flooded. Those homes were underwater 30 days. So the key point is, I'll get back to the fact that many of these homes had less than a foot of water in it. And if we can manage the water better and do what the Corps didn't do in 1930s, I'm convinced those levels can be lowered, must be lowered. Every time the rain comes, and we had an event the first week of November, 4.5 inches of rain in about 3 or 4 hours, and the volume went from 5.5 feet at Surrey Bridge to 13.7. It went up 8 feet in 4 hours. Kind of stunned and scared a lot of people. So it's indicative of frequency of flooding. And Dave Dixon's our guest tonight. He's done a study of that very issue. And Dave, why don't you share with us what your study results tell us?
Okay. Well, Harold, thank you for inviting me to come in and share this information with concerned citizens of the community here. What I have here is a PowerPoint of some analysis we did regarding the river and the frequency of flooding. We'll also comment on some other issues and try to give everybody an understanding of how all this ties together, where the water's coming from, and what may be contributing to some of the problems in the frequency of flooding on the river. And we're going to go all the way back to, it says 1940 to 2017. We actually got a little history before that. So can we have the next slide, please, and show the slides? You want to show the slide as the primary?
Yeah.
Whoops. There we go. Okay. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, first thing I want to do is make a disclaimer that all the data used in our analysis were from governmental sources, including NOAA, USGS, and Army Corps of Engineers. NOAA is the National Weather Service. The observations and analysis of the data collected are not to be considered a detailed engineering study. In some cases, this data may be incomplete, old, or not updated, or possibly even in error. An example of incomplete data, and I was telling Harold about this a little while ago, the event we had November 1st is not in the NOAA Vermillion River data set for whatever reason. Don't know why it's not there. So that questions to how many other events that aren't there, okay? And the last thing is, we're not hydrologists, just concerned citizens that are alarmed by the flooding frequency in our community and how this disrupts our lives and our businesses. Next slide, please. Okay, a little bit of history here, and it's a little small, so you may not be able to read it on your TV at home, so I'll go through it with you quickly here. About 1896, the initial dredging of the river to channel depth of 5.5 feet was done. And in 1913, the Keystone Lock and Dam was constructed on the Bayou Teche south of St. Martinville to make the Teche navigable north of the locks, okay? A lot of people don't even know that lock is there. In fact, I didn't realize that till Harold told me about that lock, okay? 1919, the root canal was built to provide fresh water from the Bayou Teche to the Vermillion Parish rice farmers. In 1935, after the Great Flood of 27, the construction of the West Atchafalaya levee blocking the drain of Bayou Catawba into the Atchafalaya River happened, okay? And in 1940, and a lot of people don't realize this, we had a flood here in Lafayette that recorded a crest of 24.87 at Surrey Street Bridge. This crest was greater than 7 feet higher than the August 2016 flood. And that should have raised a huge red flag right there, because this community would be in serious, serious trouble if another event like this happened.
Acadiana Mall is at 21 feet, so you can imagine 3 feet of water.
In the Acadiana Mall. But,
yeah.
well, I mean, this whole town would just about be underwater, okay? In 57, a second dredging of the river to a channel depth of 8 feet and 80 feet wide from the Vermillion Bay to Intercoastal Waterway, and a channel depth of 10 feet to 100 feet wide between Lafayette and the Intercoastal Canal was dug. In 57, they went back to Bayou Catawba and they added a drainage control structure there into the Henderson Swamp and raised the crest of the Keystone Lock and Dam to permit the increased diversion of water from Bayou Teche through the root canal to the Vermillion River. In 82, the Teche Vermillion Freshwater Project Commission. To give you a little history on that, why don't you tell us a little bit about that, Harold, about the Teche Vermillion, why that was done?
It was done mainly to deal with water quality and saltwater intrusion. Saltwater during heavy pumping for rice and crawfish ponds and so forth would pull saltwater from the Gulf right up the Vermillion, and then the Vermillion didn't flow very well, had a lot of sewerage problems, and so it was very septic and very toxic. And one of the goals of Teche Vermillion was maintain a flow of 1 mile an hour. Historically, if you dropped a piece of wood at the Pinhook Bridge in the Bayou Vermillion, it took 48 days to reach Vermillion Bay. So Teche Vermillion one of the goals was to allow a 2x4 dropped in at the Pinhook Bridge to reach Vermillion Bay in 48 hours. And that did a lot for saltwater backup and water quality issues, improving water quality greatly, dealing with all the sewage and everything that would stay and just move back and forth and stay just trapped in the river. And so it was a big help to the Bayou Teche. Also, even though it has a dam, it still goes over the dam, and it's been very beneficial. But the thing was designed to deal with low water drought conditions. Salt water doesn't back up the Vermillion during the flood. It only backs up during very low rainfall periods.
Right.
And so that part of it was very successful. And we wouldn't want to do anything to disrupt that success. But to deal with the flood, we'd have to improve the capacity. The gates that Dave talked about that was put in the levee to improve water quality in Henderson really is only about 400 feet. And by Catawba, where it crosses the levee, it probably has a channel of 4,000 feet.
Right.
So you only have about 10% of capacity.
We're going to show you some pictures of that later on these slides right here, so everybody can get a better feel for what we're talking about here. The last thing here,
just to what could have happened at the 2 500-foot dams. And the water went, those dams are 17.6, and the water is about 10 to 12 feet above that. There's no actual gauges that tell us that. The highest the gauge reads as 22, but the water was at 32 at Washington. At the time, Henderson was at 10. So if that capacity was large enough to lower those levels, if we could have dumped that flood into Henderson, we wouldn't have had a flood in Lafayette.
That's right.
And
well, we wouldn't. All that water from the north wouldn't have put pressure on our river.
Absolutely,
okay?
That's right.
And we're going to show some pictures and try to go over that. In 1988, the USGS conducted and published a study of the Vermillion River called Hydraulic Features and processes of the Vermillion River, Louisiana. Can we have the next slide, please? Okay, this is about me. I live across the street from the river for over 20 years now, and I can see the river from my driveway. That picture on the right is what I'm looking at, looking down my neighbor's driveway. You can see the river in the background. I noticed over the 20 years that the frequency of high water seemed to be increasing. And after the flood of 16, I started investigating what was going on, and it led to the data I will shortly talk about. And I met Mr. Harrell after he authored the guest editorial in the local paper regarding the flooding of August 16, and started working with him on investigating the possible causes and increases of the flood events in Lafayette and the river. Can we have the next slide, please? Okay, the source of this Vermillion flooding frequency data comes from the National Weather Service, the Surrey Street gauge that's operated by the National Weather Service. And again, you know, there may be some gaps in their data there, but I'm working with the data that they're publishing on their website here. So can we have the next slide, please? Okay, this is what it looks like. In fact, some of you folks have probably gone out there and looked at the Surrey Street gauge. You know, you can see what the current reading is, and you can see like I don't know, is it about a week's worth of data there, or is it 2 weeks worth of data? It's about 2 weeks worth of data.
Yeah, 2 weeks, yeah.
2 weeks worth of data.
12 days.
Where the current time is right in the middle. As an example of the graph, you can see what the current level is. You can also see colored areas there where you have minor floods and then moderate and then major floods if it gets over a certain.
Yep, the red line's flood stage.
The red line is the flood stage. The orange line is a minor flood stage, and the magenta line, purple line, is a major flood stage. Can we have the next slide, please? And they also publish on that same page a data set. And my analysis is going to be based on this data set. And so any crest above 10 feet, which is considered a minor flood event, has been recorded there, supposedly since 1940. Well, actually, since when they added Vermillion, is it Vermillion bill when they changed the flood stage and they reduced it down to 10?
It was 12, and reduced it to 10, yeah.
Okay.
And I want to say that was in the 90s that was done.
Yeah. Okay, can we have the next slide, please? So basically I downloaded this, and this is a little busy slide right here, and I'll try to explain what's going on here. Is that the population of Lafayette is the blue line on the top. The yellow line is the frequency of flooding, and you can see it's in decades here. My scale on the bottom, my time scale is in decades, it's 10 years for each sample there. So we had a total number of floods during that period of time. So for example, in 1970, 1979, we had 2 floods. And then the next decade we have 5, and the next decade we had 10, and the next decade we had 20, and we're on track right now probably for 27, 28 floods in this decade right here. So it's roughly doubling every 10 years.
It's interesting, from 1940 to 1980, there were 9 flood events in 40 years.
Right. I had a couple of timelines on here. The Teche Vermillion was right about the same time that the Red River Lock number 1 was commissioned, November '84. So right before that, Teche Vermillion was commissioned. They raised the stage in the Red River, and we're going to come to some suspicions about what that may have done to our drainage area that affects our river here and a little further down down the slides here. Can we have the next slide, please? Okay. And here what I did was basically took the measured flood frequency data per year, and I projected it out, per decade, I'm sorry, and projected it out to the 2030, the decade of the 2030s, okay? Which is really not that far, and we're on track to have greater than 6 floods per year. That's 1 every 2 months. That's crazy. That's beyond what we can deal with here. And the probability of getting another big one could be greatly increased because we're getting so many floods.
Have you tied that to rainfall? Did we get?
Yes, we have a slide in here about rainfall. We're gonna get to that.
We're
in a
not getting
minute.
that much more rain.
It's not a significant amount of rain. In fact, I think the overall trend of rainfall was slightly down. You wanna go ahead and give me the next slide, please, okay? And we're gonna talk a little bit about north of us here, like what's going on, and this is from maps. And you'll see in the red blocks on the right, upper right-hand side, the Teche Vermillion Freshwater Project. And in the blue box to the left of that is the headwaters of the Teche, Catawba Teche connection. And the headwaters of the Vermillion in magenta at the bottom down there comes off the Bayou Teche. So basically what they're doing is they're pumping water out of the river into a canal, that long rectangular red box that connects over to the levee bar pit canal that connects back to Bayou Catawba. And they raised the level of Bayou Catawba from, what was it before they put this in?
It was around 4 or 5.
The normal stage was 4 to 5, and
Yeah.
they raised it to what,
17.6.
And the
so
reason
to keep
that
it
was-
at flood.
The reason that was done was to push the water back around to the headwaters of the Teche Catawba connection, so we could push fresh water down the Teche, which correspondingly pushed fresh water down the Vermillion, down at the
Right.
bottom on the magenta connection there. Can we have the next slide, please? All right, this is an aerial satellite photograph of the pumping station where they pump water out of the Atchafalaya River into that canal that was in that previous slide, that long straight red rectangular highlight I had on there. And we made a field trip out here.
Yes.
We were hosted by he's the CEO or the chief executive of the
Donald Segura.
Donald Segura, and he did a very good job, a very gracious host, and brought us and showed us and explained the benefit of the project and all the equipment used, and had a really good field trip, a really good understanding of how it works now. Can we have the next slide, please? Okay, and this is a slide of the other end of the project, where Bayou Catawba meets the West Atchafalaya Spillway Levee. This is north of Henderson, okay?
Yep, but 20 miles north of Henderson.
In the upper right-hand corner is the weir that was topped during the 16 flood by how many feet, Harold? 10? It was
12 at least.
Yeah, we observed trash in the trees along the side of that weir, 10 feet up in the trees,
Yeah.
flood debris up in there. And on the lower right-hand corner is how they let water out of Bayou Catawba into the Henderson Spillway, okay? The Henderson Swamp. There are 4 gates that are about 10 to 15% of the channel capacity of Catawba right there, if that much, if they can operate them that much. And there's also a small gate on the Bar Pit Canal. An interesting thing I stumbled across in investigating this data was that there was a project in 2007 to increase the size of those gates, to add some more pipes and add some more gates there. That was put on hold because they said there was no economic justification. Me and Harold are going to discuss that later on.
Right.
Yeah, I think that we might have our economic justification now. Okay, next slide, please.
357 million worth of our tax dollars to deal with flooded homes in the system.
Okay, well, the big channel that you see there, this is in Port Barre, right in the middle of Port Barre. The big channel you see there is by Catawba, and the small channel you see there is by Teche. So that's the headwaters of Bayou Teche. They get everybody a feel for how all this ties together. Okay, can we have the next slide, please? And in Arnoldville, there's the Bayou Teche, the big channel, and then what they call Bayou Fusilier in Arnoldville, which is actually the Vermillion, or the headwaters of the Vermillion River.
Right.
It's just a name change, connects right in the middle of Arnoldville. Next slide, please. And of course, this is the Cypress Island Swamp in Lake Martin right here that fills up with water whenever the river starts running backwards, okay? So, I've noticed, people in the community talk about, well, the river's running north, we got a really serious problem, we got a really bad flood going on. Well, this is where all the water goes, or a lot of the water goes anyway.
And it all has to come back.
And it's all got to come back. There's no other way of getting out of there. So the river stays up forever and ever after we have a major flood.
Right.
In fact, me and Harold did a float trip down to Vermillion. It was a month or so after the flood. The river was still at flood stage, I believe.
It was, yes.
Because this thing was still draining,
Oh, yes.
through a congested river. And it was a very, very slow drain, and people in St. Martin Parish were very, very upset because they stayed underwater. In some cases, 30 days, is that right,
Yes,
Darryl?
absolutely.
30 days, okay. Next slide, please.
Part of St. Landry Parish was in that 30-day flood.
Okay, for y'all that might not be aware of it, we have a lock and dam south of St. Martinville and the Teche. And next slide is going to be a picture of that aerial photograph of the water running over that dam. Okay, and the lock is on the lower left-hand side of that picture there.
Yeah.
So that holds the water up in by a Teche.
10 feet
It
above.
was raised for the Teche Vermillion also, or it was raised for the root canal
No,
project?
the original height is 10 feet above sea level. That's the crest height. And normally, the below, it drops about 6 feet, 7 feet. So the Teche below Keystone normally is around 3.5.
Yeah. Well, another interesting thing about drainage here that I didn't realize, so Harold made me aware of it, then I witnessed myself in a float trip, is that nothing drains into the Bayou Teche north of this dam,
No,
except for
except
the connection
Catawba.
by Catawba.
Yeah,
That's it.
right.
Nothing drains into.
No.
So the Teche is sitting on a big ridge. Okay.
Big ridge
And
on each side.
There are no
No
drainage
inflows.
canals. There are no bayous, with the exception of Bayou Fuselier in Arnoldville, which is headwaters of the Vermillion,
Where it flows out.
that connects to the Teche.
Yeah.
There is nothing, okay? So it doesn't help really with any kind of drainage of the area, except for take some water that comes off of Catawba, over the dam right there, but it's gonna hold it at a certain level. Next slide, please. Okay, Harold talked about annual rainfall. One of the things we were suspicious about was, well, are the amount of rain we're getting, has it been increasing or decreasing? The blue line is in inches per year, and the data set we had only went back to 1986, okay? The dashed blue line is a trend line, it's called the best fit line of all the data set right there, and you can see it is relatively flat. So there's no general increase in, as annual rainfall. Now, disclaimer here, this is Lafayette, Louisiana only, this is not regional, okay?
Yeah.
It would have been a massive undertaking to try to sort all the data for every rain gauge in the area, that's out there on the internet, and then put all that together, which should be done in a real true engineering study, okay? The red line is the individual floods per year, and the red dashed line is the trend line, okay? And you can see the trend line is dramatically increasing, okay? It's dramatically increasing. Irregardless of any change of flood stage, whatever issues, the incidence of high water on the Vermillion River are dramatically increasing.
And what that is really saying is homes that flooded during this event are likely to flood again, and a lot more, unless something's done to change this frequency of flooding, deal with the watershed. It's the whole watershed. It's not just what's happening in Lafayette.
Right. Well, we missed it by 50 miles with Hurricane Harvey, right, Harold?
Right.
50 miles.
Absolutely.
50 miles, we'd have been in the soup again, just like we were in 2016, maybe worse,
Yeah.
We need to do something now. Next slide, please. The source of this, we took a look at the coulees that are connected to the Vermillion, the bayous and the coulees, okay? And the source of this data is this USGS study that was published in 1988. All right, a couple of notes regarding this. All inflow tributary bayous and coulees identified and measured in the study were used in the calculations on the next slide. In other words, these are not my numbers, these are USGS numbers, okay? Minor and additional coulees installed since the date of the study were not included as we have no channel data on these inflows. However, we note that these undocumented inflows may contribute to substantial inflow to the river, as some of these drainage systems are large, such as the drains for the retail developments at the corner of College Saloon and Ambassador. Another example of the drain from my subdivision. My subdivision has been there like 40 years, maybe more. 6-foot pipe. A man can stand up in that pipe. That's not in this study. So
Can carry lots of water.
yeah, so one of the things me and Harold were talking about doing was another detailed flow trip of the river, trying to document all these minor drains into the river, and then add them to this calculation that we have got going here, okay,
Yeah,
which you'll see on the next slide.
You have a 6-foot drain from downtown at the General Mouton Bridge.
Yeah, that's probably not, that wasn't, yeah.
That's not listed. Yeah.
Okay, this may be a little busy here, so if you look at the bottom, the scale at the bottom is points along the river. And the blue line is the channel capacity of the river. And the yellow or orange line that you see kind of going through the middle there is the total channel capacity of everything draining into the river at that point. In other words, this starts at the headwaters of the river and goes all the way down to Vermillion Bay for the data that we have. And the red line is the channel capacity of the river minus the coulees. In the middle of town, at the sewage plant, we're 90%. We have 90% more coulee channel area draining into the river than the river is itself. Okay. And again, that should have raised a big red flag back in 1988. You know, that, hey, look, you know, if this river is not enlarged or whatever, you know, we could be having a problem here. Now, there's a few assumptions here about this data. We don't have any gradient data on the coulees, but we can assume that the gradients of the coulees are greater than the gradient of the river. In other words,
the concrete coulee is a 2% grade.
Yeah,
That's
so
it's designed into it.
The slope of those coulees, that water hits the river very, very fast. Okay.
Very fast. Yes.
Very fast, okay. And so, you know, just cleaning the coulees in Lafayette, it may will probably exacerbate the problem with flooding frequency on the river. And then, you know, of course, when the river gets really high, then the coulees start backing up into your backyard and possibly into your house, okay?
Yep, that's what's happening, yeah.
Next slide, please. All right, this is a little busy right here. The flooding frequencies were done on Mermentau and the Red River at Alexander in addition to the Vermillion. So basically plugged in the same data from the whatever source we could get it from, whether it was from NOAA or from the Corps. And the flooding frequencies on the red actually at Alexander actually have decreased since 1970. And the flooding frequencies of the Mermentau increased by a factor of 3 times since 1970. And what was Harold had some analysis about why that's so.
Well, that's all tied into the White Lake, Grand Lake impoundment, and the Mermentau and Nepeche, all those rivers no longer flow. They're dead water systems. They have no tidal exchange, and so they're filling in. So
Right.
Channel capacity is diminished.
It's diminishing, okay.
And so if the water has to go somewhere,
Right.
if the rivers get small, it's gonna go over the banks.
Yeah.
It's interesting, at Mermentau as a principal gauge, the highest record height is 10.6. Morgan City, the highest height is 10.5. New Iberia is like 12.5. Lake Charles is 13.5, something like that. Those are all Highway 90 communities, and the high water mark for Lafayette is 24.
Mm-hmm.
So the Corps, when that flood event happened in 1940, the Corps really should have got involved and determined why this this
Why this
real,
water got this high.
yeah, why it got so high in the Vermillion, down on the Teche.
Right.
Uh,
The last thing is the flooding frequency on the Vermillion increased by a factor of 15 times since 1970. So we have a problem. Possible causations. Again, these are not a basis, based on detailed engineering study or review by hydrologists or anything like that. But these are just observations by myself and Harold about what could possibly be wrong here. First thing, increased development in Lafayette metro area increases the runoff and the speed of the runoff. I think we heard a lot about that at that council meeting here last week.
yeah,
Showing in the river bottom, last dredging was in 1950. Shallow spots in the river, in other words, okay? Flood water backflow in the Cypress Island fills that area and causes shoal, and the shoals cause the river to drain slowly after a flood, holding the river level up. Is that
Yeah.
a possibility? And well, it's pretty obvious that it is, even though this is not a detailed engineering study.
it's kind of interesting, the deepest part of the Vermillion from the bay north is right here in Lafayette. At the Pinhook Bridge, is right below the Pinhook Bridge, is 24 feet deep. Below the General Mouton Bridge is 25, and you can take that river all the way to Vermillion Bay. The deepest it gets when it gets close to the Intercoastal Canal is 16 feet.
Yeah.
So the deepest
Spots are in Lafayette.
spots, and I think
And some of the shallow spots too.
that's right, the
Yeah.
deepest and the shallowest. But that's what's, I think, causing the backward flow, that upstream channel capacity is much greater than downstream channel
Yeah.
capacity.
Inadequate floodgate drainage capacity at Bayou Catawba and the West Chapala River fills the area south of Alexandria and north of us. And again, the shoals in the river cause it to rain slowly because it's all got to come back through us
Yeah.
for the most part.
Yeah.
And we spoke about that a minute ago. The Corps had looked at that in 2007 and said there was no economic justification to increase the those drainage gates.
I think that has changed now.
Yeah. Well, if they could lower the stage in Catawba significantly by having bigger gates there and a process to open them up when there's any pending flood event, that could take a lot of the pressure from the water up north.
Yeah, take the
you know,
pressure off the
of us.
Vermillion and the Teche.
Off the Vermillion and the Teche off of us, right. Okay, let the water out into the Henderson Swamp. The Teche Vermillion freshwater project raised the water level in Bayou Catawba North, eliminating most of the retention capacity in Bayou Catawba. That ties back into the last issue. If we had sufficient gates there to lower that stage in an emergency situation where we have a pending flood, we could have the benefit of the Teche Vermillion and yet reduce the risk of water from the north of us causing a problem down here.
There's a very extensive overflow wetland swamps up by Kokodra, by Buff, by Waukesha, that this way wildlife management area is all an overflow swamp. So lowering levels on Catawba would drain those swamps.
Right.
And improve retention
Right.
during a flood.
Instead of having all
Instead
that
of
water coming
keeping
down.
it, that's right, you keep it in
Coming down the
flooding.
Vermillion and the Teche, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
yeah. The last point, the Red River Navigation Project raised the pool stages in the Red River, and we think it might force some of the Alexander water south to us.
That's
and-
according to the Teche Vermillion watershed data. Their data shows that when they built the second dam, it raised the Red River to 20 feet at Alexandria above normal height, which blocked the drainage of
Right.
Alexandria into the Red. So now it has to drain through Bayou Buff, Bayou Kokodra, the Bayou Buff, Kokodra Drainage Canal, which goes right along I-49.
Can we have the next slide, please? We're gonna have to allow us a little time if anybody wants to call in here. Some possible remedies and recommendations, dredge the river in conjunction with the coulee cleaning efforts. Took a look at the Corps Engineer site, and I couldn't find anything where they are working on a study or a project to address the river, even though I heard that they were Joe Robideau said that they were, but I couldn't find any evidence of that.
They were asked to. There was a letter sent when Tom Carroll was still in office before he retired, probably 8-9 months ago, and I don't know if the city parish government has gotten a response from the Corps to that letter.
Okay, and we understand that the Acadiana Regional Development District is supposed to be handling the waters to the north of us. They have like a $25 or $30 million
Well,
grant.
on the positive side, 8 parishes, maybe 9 parishes, with under the leadership of Guy Cormier, has pulled together and requested for the first time, a resolution of a flood issue by deal with lowering flood stages.
Yeah.
Most flood issues, they want to raise the houses and do all kinds of stuff like that, but we have the opportunity to lower those stages. We have, and all those parishes pulling together, got a great response from Governor Edwards. He was involved in directing $30 million to solving the problems we've been talking about for almost an hour. So that's and very much to the credit of Guy Cormier and Mr. Robideau and the police jury chairman, Mr. Darby in Vermillion, Larry Richard, the parish president in Iberia Parish, Guy Cormier, St. Martin Parish, have all pulled together and requested funds to deal with the Vermillion problems. Because it's all ties to the flooding they had in their parishes. So they're all pulling together. They're asking for those funds on an emergency basis, hopefully to get an answer before the end of this year.
And another thing we might want to look at is auditing the Lafayette Consolidated Government Drainage Department. Our community has some world-class engineering and project management expertise that could determine if this department is being run in a professional, efficient manner with correct prioritization of projects, okay? We passed this ballot initiative here, it gave them some more money, but we didn't see any really planned schedule, scope of work, projected budgets, or anything like that. Are we signing a blank check there with what we just did? I do think we need to really focus on this drainage department and make sure we're getting the bang for our buck that we're spending out there. And there may be other ways of doing things and get this work done quickly. We also need to think out of the box for solutions. How about using our trustee labor to help clean the coulees versus cutting grass? And maybe contract out some of this coulees work by a competitive bid process to accelerate completion of the project.
Well, one of the issues, I think, in the Youngsville area deals with sheet flow. And we have a couple of levee systems that are deficient. I think there's one off of Kali Saloom that's got problems in the newspaper yesterday. And of course, the levee around River Oaks subdivision protects around 70, 80 homes, and that levee's going down, and it's got holes in it, and had to be plugged with sandbags and the National Guard at this last event, and that some homes were flooded, but they probably preserved 70, 80 homes from flooding by the action of volunteers and the National Guard and plugging a hole in the levee. Mm-hmm. But those issues are not, they haven't been resolved. A year has passed, and levees have to be maintained. They sink, they erode. The material they're made of consolidates and diminishes in height. So levees have to be surveyed, probably annually, and where they become deficient. A levee is only as high as its lowest point, like a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. But it becomes real obvious when you survey these things where those low points are, and it shows up with modern technology with LIDAR, LIDAR, and I think LIDAR technology could deal with some of the problems around Youngsville, and North Vermillion Parish, where roads have become dams, where subdivisions have been raised at the expense of flooded homes on the wrong side of those raised sites. But LIDAR would identify all those spots, and often the solution is to bridge over or to lower those dam possibilities. Modern technology can help resolve that.
So I guess the question is, where do we go from here? We've,
Well, I think the KDN planning is moving forward with a plan with better gauges. I think that's going to be helpful. I think sheet flow, when the water's got definition of a flood is when the water goes over the banks of the bayous and coulees, and then it's flowing over the land. And if you have roads that were built too high, bridges and culverts can be installed to minimize the impact. Coulees that were built with a 2% grade has to be dealt with. See if we can get that. You on the air? Can we help you?
Yes, I was interested in asking a question or two.
Sure.
Harold, I really appreciate both of your work on this topic, and this is one of my big concerns. I'm in the Manaday subdivision, which was flooded pretty badly. And my concern is we just enacted this tax, and I don't want any more studies done. I want some action done. And I'm wondering how the average citizen goes about getting that done.
Well, one thing, writing a letter to your representative, your parish council member, and to the parish president, asking that very question, what they intend to do with this extra money we put in their hands. I think probably the most critical for your area is dredging the bayou.
Right.
That's the most important. It's not an expensive thing. The dirt would be hauled out and, sold to put in people's gardens and so forth.
you talking about dredging the
Dredging the
Bayou
bayou Vermillion, yes.
Bayou Vermillion?
Right, yes.
But that's gonna be a Corps engineer project, right? Because it's
Well,
considered
they
a
have to
navigable-
approve it, but, that could certainly be a parish project. But because it's navigable waterway, the Corps is involved invariably, and when we drafted a letter to the Corps about this issue, they emphasized the importance of maintaining navigability on the river, because that's one of their mission statements, navigation and flood control, with navigation comes first. So they can spend $300 or $400 million a year dredging the Mississippi and the Schoeffler below Morgan City. They should be able to spend $1 million dredging the Vermillion, maintaining its navigability.
Thank you very
Thank
much
you
for
so
your
much.
help and concern
But
on this issue.
a letter to the parish president would probably be very important and helpful.
I will do that.
Thank you for the call.
Thank you.
Well, I got a question, Harold, for you. You think we could ask the parish government to provide us the finances for the drainage department in some level of detail?
Of course.
That we could, you think we'd have to file a Freedom of Information Act?
No, I think-
Request to do that?
No, I don't think so. I think, I think this drainage thing needs to look at several issues. One, the bayou itself being too shallow, and it needs to deal with the Cypress Island Swamp and in supporting Guy Cormier's plan. Guy Cormier, with St. Martin Parish funds, has a plan to drain Cypress Island. You on there? Can we help you?
Whoops.
Yes, sir. That went off. We lost that call. Anyway, if you call back, we'll pick it up.
How much time we have left there?
We have 5 or 6 minutes, I believe.
2.
2 minutes, okay. All right, so On the positive side, this Teche Vermillion watershed and 8 parishes formed a group that got this $30 million. The first part of that money is going to be spent on gauges, which will help a lot. We deal with, like, there's no gauges on the Bar Pit Canal. Very important that we would have a gauge. The Bar Pit Canal at Catawba it's just a 2-foot pipe draining and a 17.6-foot wall that keeps Catawba at flood. Let's see that comb. So, you on air? Can we help you?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we got you.
Okay, I'm wanting to know about that $30 million. I thought that had been approved and that we should be moving forward on not only just looking at what needs to be done, but actually getting things done. This is real frustrating. It could have been Harvey, could have been here in Lafayette, and we would have been a disaster again. When is our city, when is our Acadian regional planning and so going to take care of all of this? We need to get moving.
Yeah, there's a lot of frustration. You reflecting a lot of anger and frustration that people are concerned that they've rebuilt their homes and they're worried about it happening again. So, very important that